I had always thought of myself as a good husband. I worked hard, came home every night, kept my promises, and tried to provide the best for my family. My wife, Sarah, was everything I could have asked for: lovely, vibrant, and supportive. We had a steady life, the kind that made you feel like you'd made it. Or so I thought. It started out small, a comment here, a look there. Little things, I guess, but enough to catch my attention. It was one of those things you can't quite put your finger on. You think you're imagining it, but when you see it happening day after day, you start to wonder. The first person to mention it was Tom. He was a buddy of mine from work, someone I'd known for years. He was the kind of guy who didn't sugarcoat things, which was probably why I trusted him. But that day, when he pulled me aside at lunch, I didn't know what to make of it. "Hey man," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but I saw something the other day. I wasn't sure if I should even mention it, but I didn't even let him finish." "What do you mean, Tom? What's going on?" Tom hesitated for a second, his eyes shifting around the room. He leaned in closer. "I saw Sarah, man. She was with some guy at the gym. Looked like they were pretty close. Too close if you ask me. They were talking, laughing, touching. I don't know, just didn't sit right with me." I remember that moment clearly. The words hit me, but they didn't fully land. "She was at the gym?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Tom nodded. "Yeah, at the fitness center. This guy, I don't know him, but I see him with her a lot. He's her personal trainer, or whatever. I don't know, maybe it's nothing, but I thought I should tell you." I don't know why, but a part of me didn't want to believe it. I brushed it off, tried to tell myself that Tom was overthinking it. I mean, Sarah was always at the gym. She'd been taking classes for months. Maybe she was just getting a little too friendly with her trainer, but that didn't mean anything, right? Still, a part of me couldn't shake it. I couldn't ignore it, even if I wanted to. That night, after dinner, I found myself watching Sarah more closely than I had in a long time. The way she seemed distracted, like her mind was elsewhere, or the way she kept checking her phone, even though she wasn't really texting anyone. She told me it was work, but something felt off. I didn't bring it up, though. I couldn't bring myself to ask her. The idea seemed absurd. What if I was wrong? What if Tom was just being paranoid? But then there was the phone call, the one that changed everything. It was late, probably around 10:30 p.m., when I was getting ready for bed. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Sarah, or so I thought. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It wasn't her. The message was brief, but it was clear. "Hey babe, can't wait to see you tomorrow. I'm looking forward to another session. Let's make it special, just like last time." My heart raced. The first thought that crossed my mind was that it had to be a mistake. Maybe Sarah had meant to send it to someone else. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. Who else would be texting her like that? And why would she leave her phone unlocked like that, knowing I would see it? I put the phone down, a knot tightening in my chest. The disbelief was overwhelming. The woman I thought I knew, the one I'd shared my life with for years, was sending messages like that. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it was a fluke. But deep down, I knew something was happening. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Sarah didn't notice, but I was watching her more carefully than usual. She seemed normal, too normal. That was when the guilt crept in. Was I just paranoid? Was I making something out of nothing? I found myself replaying that moment at lunch with Tom. Maybe I was just being too hard on Sarah, too quick to assume the worst. But deep down, a voice inside me kept telling me that something wasn't right. As I went through the day, I found myself trying to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to the message. Who was she really texting? What was she hiding? When Sarah came home that night, I felt the tension in the air. She kissed me on the cheek, just like she always did, but it wasn't the same anymore. My mind was racing, questioning every little thing. "Hey," she said, as we sat down for dinner. "How was your day?" I nodded, not really listening. "Fine." She seemed to be in a good mood, but I couldn't ignore the nagging thought in my head. The one that whispered, "You're being lied to." The next few days dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that something was hiding just beneath the surface of our everyday life. Sarah was acting normal, almost too normal. She was polite, attentive, but there was this distance, this wall between us that I couldn't explain. It was like she was there, but not really. The phone calls, the messages, her strange behavior. Everything pointed to the same conclusion, but I didn't want to face it. I couldn't. One evening, I decided to confront her. My nerves were on edge, my mind was a mess of doubt, and I had no idea what I was going to say. But I knew I couldn't go on pretending I didn't see what was right in front of me. I was in the living room, flicking through the channels on the TV, when Sarah walked in. She looked at me with a soft smile, as if nothing was wrong. "You okay?" she asked, her voice light. I turned the TV off and looked at her. She had no idea what was coming. No idea how much I was questioning everything she'd ever told me. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just thinking." She sat down beside me, her usual comforting presence somehow making the tension even worse. I stared at her, waiting for the right moment to say what was on my mind. It wasn't like me to be confrontational. I wasn't the type to start fights. But this was different. I had to know. I got a strange text the other night," I said, my voice flat. Her eyes narrowed, and she shifted slightly, as if uncomfortable. "A strange text? What do you mean?" "From your phone," I continued. "It wasn't you. It was someone else. A guy." She blinked, her face freezing for a moment, and I could see a flicker of something in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice suddenly defensive. I leaned forward. I saw the message. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." "It wasn't from you, Sarah." "Who was it from?" She looked at me, her expression tightening. "You're overreacting. It must have been a mistake. Maybe you read it wrong. I don't know what you're talking about." I watched her, searching her face for any sign of honesty. Her eyes didn't waver. Her lips didn't tremble. She was calm, almost too calm. The way she spoke, so dismissive, made it clear that she thought I was just imagining things. But I wasn't. I knew what I'd seen. I wasn't stupid. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "don't lie to me. I saw it. I know what it said, and I know you've been spending a lot of time with your personal trainer. I've seen you. I've seen the way you act when you're with him." Her face reddened, and for a moment, I thought she might admit it. But then she scoffed, crossing her arms. "This is ridiculous. I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of nothing. I told you, he's just my trainer. I'm just trying to get in shape. I'm not doing anything wrong." I felt a cold, bitter resentment rising in me. She was lying, and she knew it. She was doing her best to manipulate me, to make me feel like I was crazy. But I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining anything. "You think I'm stupid?" I said, my voice rising. "You think I don't see what's going on? You've been spending all this time with him. You've been texting him. And now you're telling me it's nothing? You're lying." Sarah's eyes flashed with irritation. "You need to trust me," she said, her tone cold now. "I don't know why you're accusing me of something I haven't done. I've done nothing wrong. I don't owe you an explanation. You're just being paranoid." Her words hit me like a slap, but they only made me angrier. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even trying to make it better. She was playing it off like it was my fault for even asking the question. I stood up, pacing the room. "You're lying to my face. You're pretending like nothing's going on, but I know the truth. You think I'm too dumb to figure it out?" Sarah stood up too, her eyes now narrowing into slits. "I'm not going to stand here and listen to you accuse me of something I didn't do. If you don't trust me, maybe you should just leave. Maybe you should figure things out on your own." I stared at her, the words like a knife twisting in my chest. She was pushing me away. She was blaming me, making me feel like I was the one who was in the wrong. How had it come to this? How had I gone from being the man she loved to the man she couldn't stand? "I trusted you, Sarah," I said quietly, feeling the weight of the years we'd spent together. "But now I don't know what to believe anymore." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, feeling more alone than I ever had before. I couldn't stop the thoughts swirling in my head. She was lying. She was cheating. But why? Why would she do this to me? What had I done wrong? I'd given her everything. I'd been a good husband, a good provider, a good man. But maybe that wasn't enough. Maybe that had never been enough. I was left with nothing but questions, and an emptiness that couldn't be filled. I tried to shake off the conversation with Sarah the next day, but it lingered like a bad taste I couldn't wash out of my mouth. I had been calm, too calm. The anger was there, just simmering beneath the surface, but I didn't let it out. Instead, I tried to keep it together, tried to convince myself that maybe it was just a misunderstanding, that maybe she really wasn't doing anything wrong. But deep down, I knew better. I started paying closer attention to Sarah's every move. The way she checked her phone at odd times, the way she smiled a little too brightly when she talked about her trainer, the way she seemed so distracted. It all added up in my mind, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was off. I needed answers. Real answers. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't going to just sit around and wait for Sarah to come clean. I wasn't going to let her keep feeding me lies. I had to know for sure, one way or another. I started by looking through her things. I felt dirty doing it, like a part of me had crossed a line I couldn't uncross, but the need for answers was too strong. I went through her purse, her phone, her laptop, anything I could get my hands on. But every time I found something that could lead me to the truth, she had already covered her tracks. She was careful, too careful. I felt like I was being pushed further and further into a corner, and I hated it. I hated feeling like I was the one doing something wrong when all I wanted was the truth. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know how to get to the bottom of this, how to confront her again when she had already turned every conversation back onto me, making me feel like I was the one in the wrong. I went to the gym that afternoon, trying to act casual. I had to see for myself if there was anything going on. I knew she trained there often, and I had seen her train her a few times in passing, but I never paid much attention. Today I was going to... I walked in, the smell of sweat and rubber mats heavy in the air. I scanned the room, trying to look like I belonged there, like I wasn't on a mission. It didn't take long for my eyes to fall on them. Sarah was sitting on a bench, talking to him. Her trainer, the one Tom had mentioned. He was leaning in a little too close, laughing at something she had said, his hand resting on her knee. I felt the anger flare up again, hot and sharp, but I swallowed it down. I had to stay calm. I had to see it through. It wasn't just the touch that bothered me. It was the way they looked at each other, like they shared a joke I wasn't in on, like they had a secret that was too deep for me to understand. I stood there, frozen, watching them interact, trying to keep my breathing steady. Every instinct in my body told me to walk up to them, to confront them both, but I held back. I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I took a step back, trying to blend into the background. I couldn't stop watching them, though. I had to know. Was this just an innocent conversation? Or was it something more? After a while, Sarah stood up, stretching out her arms. The trainer smiled at her, and I could see the way he looked at her, a little too fondly, a little too long. I was no fool. That look said everything. They had something going on. I felt sick to my stomach. My suspicions were right. It wasn't just the texts. It wasn't just the way she'd been acting. It was all of it. I had seen enough. But even then, part of me still didn't want to believe it. My heart screamed at me to turn away, to forget what I'd just witnessed, to hold on to the life I'd known before this all started. But I couldn't. I couldn't unsee it. I walked out of the gym, my mind racing, but my body numb. I was angry, sure, but I was also defeated. I had known the truth for a while now, but seeing it with my own eyes, it made everything feel real. Too real. That night, Sarah came home late, as usual. She tried to act like everything was fine, like I hadn't seen what I had. She kissed me on the cheek, told me about her day, asked me how mine had been, but I wasn't listening. My mind was still replaying the scene at the gym. The laughter, the touch, the looks. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask her anything. I didn't even want to. There was no point in pretending anymore. She looked at me after a while, sensing something was wrong. What's going on? You've been so quiet lately. Is everything okay? I stared at her, at the woman who had been lying to me, who had been hiding this affair right under my nose. The anger came back in waves, but so did the confusion. I had no idea who this person was anymore. The woman I loved, the woman I had spent my life with, had become someone I didn't recognize, someone I couldn't trust. I'm fine, I said finally, my voice flat. Just tired. I didn't want to talk about it. Not yet. But the anger was bubbling up again. I was done pretending. Sarah didn't press me any further. But the look on her face told me she knew something had shifted. Maybe she wasn't as clueless as she'd seemed. Maybe she knew I was onto her. And that was when I realized this was just the beginning. There was no going back now. I was going to confront her. I didn't care if she denied everything again. I needed to hear the truth from her, no matter how painful it was. Because the longer I waited, the worse it would get. The days that followed felt like a slow burn. Each one dragged on longer than the last, filled with the weight of my own thoughts. It was as though the whole world had become a blur of lies, and I was trapped in the middle of it. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think straight. Everywhere I looked, there was evidence, little pieces that proved I wasn't wrong about her. But I couldn't figure out what I was supposed to do with all of it. Sarah seemed to sense the tension in the air. Her usual carefree demeanor was slipping, replaced by something more guarded. She watched me more closely than ever, as though she was waiting for me to say something, anything. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Then one night, everything came to a head. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the house was still and everything felt normal on the surface. I couldn't take it any longer. The anger, the frustration, the resentment, it had all been building up, and tonight I couldn't hold it in anymore. I waited until after dinner, when Sarah was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine, pretending like everything was fine. She looked up as I walked into the room. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she didn't say anything. She knew I wasn't in the mood for small talk. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice low and steady. She put the magazine down, her expression shifting into something more serious. "About what?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I had to keep my cool, had to make sure I didn't lose control. But as soon as I spoke, I could hear the anger in my voice, despite my best efforts to keep it in check. "I saw you at the gym," I said. "With him, your trainer. I saw the way you were looking at each other." Her face went pale, and for a second, I thought she might say something, apologize, deny, or even defend herself. But she didn't. Instead, she just stared at me, her mouth hanging slightly open, as if she didn't know what to say. "You're not fooling me, Sarah," I continued, my voice growing more forceful. "I know what's going on. The messages, the time you've been spending with him, it's all adding up. I'm not stupid." For the first time, she looked uncomfortable. She shifted on the couch, her hands nervously smoothing out the fabric of her shirt. "I don't know what you think you saw, but you're wrong. Nothing is going on. You're imagining things." I clenched my fists at my sides, the frustration rising. "I'm imagining things?" I said through gritted teeth. "I saw you with him. I saw the way you were looking at him, the way he was touching you. You can deny it all you want, but I know the truth." She shook her head, her voice growing desperate. "You don't understand. You're blowing this all out of proportion. He's just my trainer. We're just friends. I don't know why you're acting like this." It was clear that she was trying to manipulate me, trying to make me feel like I was the crazy one. She wasn't even acknowledging the obvious. She was lying through her teeth. I could see it in her eyes. The denial was thick, and I could almost taste it in the air between us. "I'm not crazy, Sarah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I saw it, and I'm done pretending I didn't. You've been lying to me, and I want to know why." Her face turned red with anger, her lips pressed into a tight line. "I don't owe you an explanation," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "I don't have to explain myself to you. You're the one who's been snooping around, accusing me of things I haven't done. Maybe you should take a look at yourself before you start blaming me." Her words stung, but they didn't surprise me. She was good at turning things around, making it seem like I was the one in the wrong. It was always easier for her to blame me than face the truth. "Is that how you're going to play it?" I asked, my voice hardening. "You're going to keep lying? Keep pretending? Fine. I'm done asking. But just know this, I know what's been going on, and I'm not going to let you drag me into your mess anymore." For a moment, there was silence. Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or guilt. But she didn't say anything. She just stared, as if trying to read me, trying to figure out what I was going to do next. "I can't believe you do this," I said, more to myself than to her. "After everything, after all these years, this is how you repay me?" Her gaze softened for just a moment, but then she quickly recovered, putting up that wall I'd grown so used to. "I'm not the one who's been lying," she said, her voice cold again. "You're the one who's made this into something it's not." I felt a surge of bitterness, of resentment, boiling up inside me. She still wasn't taking responsibility. She still wasn't owning up to what she'd done. She was blaming me, deflecting, refusing to admit anything. "I don't want to hear your excuses anymore," I said, standing up, my fists clenching at my sides. "I've had enough of this. You want to keep lying? Fine. But don't expect me to just sit here and pretend everything's okay. I'm done." I turned to leave the room, but before I could get too far, she called out, her voice trembling. "Please don't go. We can talk about this. We can figure it out." But I didn't turn around. I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't listen to her anymore. As I walked out of the room, I knew I wasn't coming back until I had the answers I needed. I wasn't going to let this go. Not now, not ever. It's funny how quickly a life you thought you understood can turn upside down. One moment, you're sitting at the dinner table, laughing about some stupid thing that happened during the day, and the next, you're alone in your thoughts, questioning every single moment you've spent with someone. Every word, every gesture. I couldn't look at Sarah the same way anymore. Even when she was right in front of me, it felt like she was a stranger. Maybe she always had been. After I walked out that night, everything between us became tense, like we were two people living in the same house, but never really acknowledging each other. The house that had once been our home, filled with the noise of daily life, now felt hollow. Every corner, every room seemed to remind me of what was missing. The trust, the respect, the simple understanding of each other that I thought we had built. For days, Sarah didn't say much. She wasn't apologizing, wasn't trying to make things right. She just existed in the same space as me, pretending like nothing was wrong, like we hadn't just crossed a line that could never be erased. I couldn't keep quiet, though. Every time I looked at her, my anger surged again. Every time I saw her standing there, pretending to be normal, pretending that everything was okay, it made my blood boil. I wanted to scream at her, ask her why. Why him? Why now? Why not just be honest with me from the start? But I didn't. Instead, I kept to myself. I spent most of my time outside the house, either at work or walking around, just trying to escape. I didn't want to confront her anymore. Not yet. I wanted to wait, to make sure I had all the facts, to see if I could make sense of it before I lost my mind. It was during one of these walks that I ran into Tom. He was a friend from work, a guy I'd known for years, and someone I trusted. We had always gotten along, casual lunches, drinks after work, nothing too personal. But that day, when I bumped into him outside a cafe, he seemed uneasy. He was looking at me in a way that was different from usual, like he was wrestling with something. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, giving me a quick glance as we shook hands. I could tell he was uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure how to start the conversation. I nodded, trying to force a smile. He had just been busy. You know how it is. But Tom didn't buy it. He looked around for a moment, then lowered his voice. "Look, I didn't want to say anything, but I think you need to know something." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He shifted uneasily. "I saw Sarah the other day. At the gym. She was with him. Your trainer." My heart dropped. Even though I had already suspected it, hearing it from someone else, someone I knew, made everything feel so much more real. My stomach churned, and I had to force myself not to react too strongly. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear more. "What exactly did you see?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Tom hesitated. He looked uncomfortable, almost like he was regretting saying anything. "Look, I don't know the details, man. But they were close. Too close. They were all over each other. It wasn't just a friendly workout session. She was into him. That's all I'm saying." I stood there for a moment, trying to process what he had said. I wasn't surprised. I'd suspected it for weeks. But hearing it from someone else, someone I trusted, made it all feel more concrete, more final. It was like the last nail in the coffin. "Thanks for telling me," I muttered, not sure how else to respond. I wasn't angry at Tom. I was angry at the situation. I was angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. We said our goodbyes quickly, and I walked away, my mind racing. There was the proof. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was real. It had been real all along. And as much as I hated to admit it, part of me had already known. But knowing and hearing it from someone else felt like being stabbed in the gut. When I got home, Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, looking like she was waiting for something. I didn't even bother to say hello. I just walked past her, my mind still whirling with everything I'd just heard. She called after me, but I didn't turn around. "Where are you going?" I ignored her, grabbed my keys, and left the house again. I couldn't be around her. Not yet. I needed to think, needed space. But deep down, I knew this was it. There was no more pretending, no more excuses. I spent hours driving around aimlessly, my thoughts spiraling. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me, suffocating me. I kept thinking about the moments I had shared with Sarah, wondering if any of them had been real. Had she always been like this? Or had I just been too blind to see it? By the time I returned home, the house felt colder. Sarah was still there, still pretending like everything was normal. But the air between us was thick with the unsaid, with everything that had gone unaddressed. I didn't confront her then. I couldn't. I needed time to figure out what I was going to do next. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let this go. Not now. Not ever. The days after that felt like a countdown, each one moving closer to something inevitable. The walls in our house felt thinner, like they were closing in on me, making it harder to breathe. I couldn't escape the reality of what Sarah had done, what she'd been doing. It was like every conversation we had felt scripted, forced, and meaningless. She had nothing real to say anymore. And neither did I. Every time she looked at me, it felt like a betrayal. I'd catch her glancing at me from across the room, her eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and defiance. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She didn't need to. She knew that I knew. And yet, she still denied it. Still pretended nothing had changed. It was maddening. But the thing that hurt the most wasn't the affair itself. It wasn't the lies, the betrayal, or the shame. It was how easy it all seemed for her. How effortless she made it look. She had no remorse, no regret. It was as though I had never mattered to her. And that was the part one couldn't swallow. The part that kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering when I had become so invisible to her. It was a Saturday afternoon when I finally hit my breaking point. Sarah had been quiet all morning, hiding behind a book in the living room, pretending like the world wasn't crumbling around us. I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't stand her pretending that everything was fine while I was suffocating under the weight of the truth. I walked into the room, my heart pounding, my hands trembling with anger. I didn't even give her a chance to speak before I blurted out the words that had been building up inside me for days. "You're still lying to me," I said, my voice sharp, my anger unmistakable. She looked up from the book, her eyes narrowing as if she wasn't sure whether to take me seriously. "What are you talking about now?" I didn't wait for her to finish. I was beyond trying to make her understand. "I know about you and him. Your trainer. I know everything. And I'm done pretending I don't." Sarah stiffened. Her face, which had been calm, now twisted with something I couldn't name. Fear, maybe, or irritation. But it didn't matter. I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking as I fought to keep it steady. "Why am? Why now?" She stood up quickly, her expression shifting from annoyance to something more defensive. "I don't know what you think you know, but you're wrong," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "This isn't what you think. There's nothing going on. Nothing." I couldn't stop the bitter laugh that escaped my mouth. "You expect me to believe that? After everything I've seen? After everything I've heard?" She took a step back, her hands shaking now, but she didn't let herself show too much weakness. "It's not what you think," she repeated, almost pleading, but her words sounded hollow. "You don't know the whole story." I crossed the room in 2 strides, standing right in front of her, my breath hot with anger. "Then tell me, Sarah. Tell me what I don't know. Tell me why you've been lying to me. Tell me why you've been with him, behind my back." For a moment, there was silence. Her eyes flickered away from mine, and I saw something I hadn't expected: fear. But it wasn't the fear of being caught. It was the fear of losing control, of losing me. She swallowed hard before speaking again, her voice quieter now. "You don't understand. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't want it to get this far. But it did, and now I don't know how to fix it." It was almost laughable. The way she spoke, the way she tried to make herself sound innocent, like she was the victim in all of this. Like I was supposed to feel sorry for her. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It's not about fixing it. You can't fix this. You've already made your choice. You've already shown me who you really are. Sarah flinched at my words, and I saw a flicker of something. Guilt, maybe. Or maybe it was just desperation. She reached out, her hand brushing against my arm, but I pulled away, not wanting her touch anymore. "Please don't," she said, her voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you. I don't know. I don't know what happened. It wasn't supposed to be like this." Her words felt like nails on a chalkboard. Every time she tried to explain, every time she begged for forgiveness, it only reminded me of how much she had taken from me. Trust, dignity, respect, all of it, gone in an instant. "You think I'm going to forgive you?" I asked, the words coming out more bitter than I intended. "You think I'm going to let you off the hook because you say you didn't mean to hurt me?" She nodded, her eyes wide, pleading. "I didn't. I swear. I never meant to." I took a step back, my chest tight with anger. "You can't undo what's been done, Sarah. You can't take it back. And you sure as hell can't expect me to just forget about it." She looked at me like I had slapped her, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and hurt. But I didn't care. I couldn't care anymore. The woman I had married, the woman I had trusted, was gone. And I wasn't going to keep pretending like she still existed. "I don't want to hear it anymore," I said, turning on my heel and walking toward the door. "I'm done." I left the room without looking back, and this time, when I walked out of the house, I knew I wasn't coming back. Not until I had figured out what I was going to do next. It's strange, how something like betrayal can make you feel both lighter and heavier at the same time. Light because the illusion is finally shattered. No more pretending. No more playing the fool. The truth is out in the open, and there's no way to stuff it back into the dark corners where it came from. But it's also heavy because the weight of the reality sets in. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And that's what was crushing me now. The knowledge that everything I had built with Sarah was built on sand. Nothing was solid. Nothing was real. The days after our confrontation were a blur. I spent a lot of time out of the house, pacing around, thinking about everything. About her. About us. I couldn't stand being in the same room as her anymore. Every glance she threw my way felt like a lie wrapped in silk. I wasn't angry anymore, at least not in the way I had been. Anger was too simple. Now I was just numb, stuck in the purgatory between what had been and what would never be again. I didn't make any rash decisions immediately. That's not who I am. I like to think things through, process, and make choices based on reason rather than emotion. But there were moments when I saw her standing there in the kitchen, pretending like we were just going through a rough patch, when I could feel my resolve starting to crack. She still tried, though. She tried harder than I thought she would. The calls, the texts, the desperate attempts to sit down and talk it out. She wanted to fix it, or at least pretend like she did. She even promised she'd cut ties with him, the trainer, that they had made a mistake. But it was too little too late. The words had already lost their meaning. And, deep down, I knew she wasn't telling the whole truth. There was still something she wasn't saying. There was always something she was holding back. But I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses anymore. I didn't want her words. I wanted actions. I wanted to see her fight for what we had, if it was worth fighting for. But everything she did felt like another attempt to keep me hooked, another effort to avoid facing the reality of what she'd done. One evening, after yet another uncomfortable dinner where neither of us could make eye contact for more than a second, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up abruptly, pushed my chair back, and grabbed my coat. She looked at me with confusion in her eyes, like she couldn't understand why I was leaving again. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice quiet, tentative. "I don't know yet," I said, and I walked out of the door without another word. I needed to get away, far away from her, from everything that had become so suffocating. I drove aimlessly for hours, the cold night air whipping through the cracked windows, the hum of the engine, the only sound in the world. I thought about everything, about how we had started, about the plans we'd made, about the life we'd built. And then I thought about the lies, the betrayal, and everything that had fallen apart. It wasn't just the affair. It was everything that came with it. The lack of respect, the disregard for the bond we once shared. The way she seemed to think I'd just accept it, forgive it, and move on like it was a minor mistake. But this wasn't something I could forgive. I couldn't just move past it. Because once you've been hurt like that, you can't unfeel it. You can't forget the truth. The truth that she had chosen him over me. The truth that she had lied about it, over and over again, until I had no choice but to find out for myself. When I finally stopped the car, I was parked at the edge of a small park near our house, the lights from the street lamps reflecting off the dark water of a nearby fountain. It was quiet, too quiet. My mind was racing, my heart was pounding, but the peace of the night seemed to have a calming effect. I sat there for a while, just breathing, thinking. And then, finally, I made the decision. I couldn't stay with Sarah. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. Trust was the foundation of everything we had built, and that foundation was shattered. No amount of apologies, no amount of promises could put it back together. I knew that now. I wasn't going to stick around just for the sake of history, for the sake of a life we had once shared. It wasn't enough anymore, and I wasn't going to waste any more of my time on a relationship that had no future. A relationship that had died long before I had even realized it. The next morning, I packed a bag, got a hotel room, and made the phone call I had been dreading. The one that would end everything. When Sarah picked up, her voice was shaky, like she knew what was coming, like she had been waiting for it, even though she had tried so hard to avoid it. "Are you coming home?" she asked, her voice low. "I'm not coming back," I said. "We're done." She didn't say anything for a moment, and for a second, I thought she might beg me to stay, might tell me she'd change, that she'd fix everything. But there was nothing, just silence. And that was it, the end of everything. I hung up the phone and didn't look back. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew I couldn't keep living in the past. It was time to move on, time to take the pieces of my life and rebuild. It was going to be hard, maybe even painful, but it was the only way forward. Because sometimes, the hardest thing to do is the only thing that will set you free. And that's exactly what I was going to do. Set myself free.